Okay, so we'll call the regular meeting to order. And are there any comments from the public regarding items not on the agenda? Seeing none, we'll move on to amendments to the agenda. I believe there is one.
Yep, so I'd like to add just an update on the tuition overcharge and undercharge.
Where should we put that?
Probably like, why don't we do 6A or something like that, Martin?
6A. And we're missing our student reps who usually do our announcements for us. So, David, did you want to do that?
Yeah, so again, you have at your place the announcements. We have a lot going on. Again, these are just some of the big items, but big picture student exhibitions are going to start to happen January 4th to the 11th. And again, board members are certainly welcome to be part of those if you wish. Again, we usually would let folks know that you'll be there. We have a music fundraiser going on the annual Christmas tree pickup. That will be happening on January 6th. So again, you probably see some of those signs around South Burlington. Again, kids working to do that. I think it's a good service. Isaiah Hines, as you know, was named as Vermonter of the Year. Again, a lot of press on that particular situation. Again, just making you aware if you haven't seen that. And the Frederick H. Tuttle Middle School will present Almost Maine Friday and Saturday, January 12th and 13th. And tickets are available. If board members would like to go, you can certainly let us know. We'll work to get you some tickets. And January 12th is a elementary early release day, dismissal at 12:30, and no school on January 15th, Martin Luther King Day. And attached to that is the big picture student exhibition dates, and you do see Alex is in there on, what day is she on? January...
On Wednesday the 10th.
10th, yeah. So again, those are the announcements.
So I think we're going to make one more announcement. I can do it for you, Bridget, since you're on not the best phone for that. That we sent out.
That'd be great.
Yeah, we sent out a letter regarding various issues that we want the legislature to pay attention to when they're dealing with education issues. And we did get a response from David Sharp, who is the chair of the Education Committee, inviting somebody on behalf of the board to go and testify about some of the things that we wrote about. Elizabeth's not here, so she would be the natural person to do this. And the main thing is I also just wanted to understand from the rest of the board, while we're on this, if there's any objection to having Elizabeth go on behalf of the board. And not seeing objection, I think we can contact Elizabeth and explain to her
Yep.
that we're going to send her to Montpelier on our behalf.
Mm-hmm.
So, all right, so city and school collaboration.
So unfortunately, we have not had we canceled, I forget what day it was. It wasn't a great weather day, but Helen really was not able to make the meeting, so our last meeting canceled, and we'll be rescheduling that meeting. So that's a meeting again between the chair of the board, Elizabeth, myself, Kevin Dorn, the city manager, and Helen Reilly, the chair of the city council. Currently, I did talk with Kevin Dorn just on the reschedule. We don't have a date yet, but we will be sharing and have been sharing kind of where we are with our respective budgets and what's moving forward. That's an important part, obviously, for the school board to know is what's the city issues related to budget looking like, and they need the same from us. So we'll be working on that as well.
And can you remind me when the next meeting is with the steering committee meeting?
So we have a legislative lunch that's scheduled currently on the 8th, Monday the 8th. That's coming up pretty quickly. It's a legislative lunch that's different than we've ever done before. It's usually been a legislative breakfast. But I think it worked for a variety of people. So it's a legislative lunch. Our representatives and senators are all invited. And again, it isn't a meeting that is available to people if they want to come. Again, that's the 8th at noon. And then we have at the city offices. And then we also have a steering committee meeting, and Meg, is it for the 11th? I'm not positive on that
Okay.
yet date. 11th sounds early to me. I can look here quickly in a second. I think it's the 20th? 24th. Thank you, Diane Bugby. So January 24th. And again, I will still check that, not that I don't.
And that will be to go over the budget, right?
So that's our steering committee. That's where the city presents the budget and we present, and there's opportunities for community members to discuss and ask a variety of questions.
Okay. All right. So moving on to tuition overcharge, undercharge, an explanation there.
So when we last, I think 2 meetings ago, or was it the last meeting, we did share with you our tuition numbers, and that you can charge. This is a kind of an opportunity for what they call a tuition overcharge or undercharge. And there's a certain date. There's a certain date that's specified, and we honored that. But one of the things that we said was that we could not if it was in the 3%.
Right.
So I'm wanting to be just transparent. We could, if it's within that, we could go out and ask for that amount based on the statutory requirements. And again, it's under C, where you could go out and do that. We, again, recommend administratively that we not do that. We think it's close enough, and we don't think it's in our best interest to go out and kind of continue to shore that up when it's not that. When it's a significant amount, but it's also trying to be sensitive to the districts and schools that are sending to us. So again, I wanted to clear that up because there were some questions that were brought up at our last meeting. Okay?
All right, to the public hearing on the budget.
Okay, so this is a big part of, again, tonight. So we're going to walk you through this, John and I, in just a minute. As I start, I don't want to necessarily go through all of the slides the same, because again, there's a lot of redundancy there. I think as board members may have questions around what might be happening with things that are contained in the bond, we can go to those details, but we're going to walk you through kind of the budget presentation. This is being called the administration's recommended budget. And again, I want to just reiterate a couple quick points. This budget works to maintain student opportunities and programs that are essential for students to achieve desired educational goals that are outlined in our district ends policy. 1. 2, it continues to provide programs and professional development for our staff that allow for sustainability of our schools and the excellence as measured in our outcomes, also our ends. It continues to utilize student assessment data to adjust and deploy resources in identified areas of need. And lastly, it also continues to maintain safe learning environments for our students and staff to work. And this is done by an adherence to our established stewardship plan that's been in place for some now almost 15 years for all 5 school buildings. And this budget recommendation, the budget recommendation requests the use of bonds as a financial instrument so that the cost is spread over a 20-year period for items that have more than a 20-year life. And again, this is put together with feedback that came from board members from the previous meetings, as well as our Citizens Budget Advisory, as well as other questions that have come in from citizens throughout that period of time. In addition, before we get started, I do want to also point out, and I know that these are at your place as well, but some of those questions that have come either through our citizens budget or through you folks are also in our FAQs, and these will also be posted up on our website and will continue to be added to provide clarity both to board members and community members as we move forward. And again, this is an ongoing process. This is a process that we've used in the past as well. Any questions before we move on?
Is the mail packet the same as the one that's tonight?
So,
We made very, very slight typographical corrections to the
Okay.
one that's on your table tonight. We also added more detail on the recommended additions page. We had those on one page. They now take up 3 pages.
Okay.
So there's actually 2 more pages in the tonight's version than the one you were mailed.
Okay, thank you.
so I think what we'll do is we'll just go through this, and maybe just because I'm concerned about people seeing and also hearing, not just our audience, but also other folks. So I think I'm just going to stay seated, which is kind of hard for me, but I think I'll do that. So again, this is the recommended administrative budget. This is the table of contents. We think this is important because just navigating through this document, as long as it is important to have pages and appropriately identified. The next page, again, hard to see, but a couple things. This is what was presented back in December 19. And in this particular rendition, our budget was decreasing 0.13. And we did not have factors yet established by the common level of appraisal, and we did not have equalized. And so the net result, as presented last time, was at the 3.23% increase, even though we had a budget slight decrease. This did factor in $98,000 of administrative reduction because we felt strongly about having the continuation of those important programs, but also we were being mindful of recommendations from the board on that tax rate percentage. So that was, again, December 19th. Since then, we have had information come in around our equalized pupils. Remember, equalized pupils does not equal seated students. We get weighted information based on students, so high school is a little bit more than an elementary. A student that is an English language learner gets a little bit more. All of those factored in equal what we then call our equalized pupil. Here is the statewide total back to 2014 and currently where they're at, and they're seeing a 2% reduction. South Burlington, along the same way, we're seeing a 5.5% increase in our equalized pupil, and we're going from 2416.53 to 2512.79. This is significantly above what we last projected. We last projected about 30 additional students, or 13 actually, in our December 19th budget. This is now up, again, around 96 students, or 82 students equalized from our previous presentation. So this is an important driver in the budget development, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. This.
How many actual students is that an increase of?
I don't have that
Okay.
exact at the moment because it doesn't factor in that way. We do know through the McGibbon report that we are increasing enrollment, and you'll see some of those increases in slides that are going to come up, Jerry, in just a minute. Mm-hmm.
And if I could, do we have any further explanation of why we saw such
Yes.
a large
Yeah.
increase? Okay.
Yeah, and I think, John, we get into that in a little bit here further, but let me pause there. I think that's a good place to pause. In your FAQs, on page 4 is part of it, on number 10.
Yeah, I did see that. It didn't really explain why.
We have some additional ones that we just haven't put in there yet, but we will. So let me just give you a quick overview. One is pre-K. So we have about 320 students in our pre-K program that receive 10 hours or more preschool per week. It's a 2-year rolling average. That's true for equalized pupils. Our pre-K students count for 0.46 of an FTE equalized. So 300, it's about 140 students that add into that equalized pupil count. It's a 2-year rolling average, so it doesn't all hit in 1 year. We've been at pre-K for a long time, longer than anyone else probably in Vermont, providing substantial support for pre-K. We've been recipients of kind of that 2-year rolling average. We're seeing that. At the same time, we have slight increases in enrollment at Chamberlain, at Orchard. Orchard, as you know, is now up just a tad over 400 students. Rick Marquardt is pretty flat. We've actually seen a slight reduction there, just a few students. The high school and the middle school have also seen increases. So all those factored together. In addition, we have an ELL population, our English language learner population. We're number 3 in the state for the number of students that we serve as English as a second language. We're behind Burlington and Winooski. We have 196 of those students that we serve. And again, those are also add into the equalized pupil count as well. So all of those factored in together is what makes up that increase in the equalized numbers. And again, we can give you, and folks can see on the FAQs, we'll break that down a little bit more for folks from the previous year. So to go back, this is again what was presented, the same thing that was presented on 12/19, the same $98,000 reduction. So there's been no change in budget request here, but it simply factors in the equalized and the CLA difference. And so with that said, the budget, again, goes down 0.13. There's no change there. I know that's hard to see. We then get down here to that tax rate, which is at 0.81%. That's the driver between those factors which attribute then to the outcome associated with the tax rate. Questions before I move on?
Are we going to get a chance to talk about equalized pupils later on? So I can ask my questions now.
I think it's up to you. If it's pertinent, I think you ask.
Sure. So I did take a dive into the spreadsheets that you sent me, John, and I noticed that pre-K is high. Is that because we're including more than 1 year of kids, like age 4 and age 3, and some age 5?
I think that's most likely because South Burlington got into the pre-K business earlier and heavier than any other district in the state, or that's what I think. And there's more of a culture here for that being an ongoing program, and kids should take advantage of it. I think you'll probably see the rest of the state coming up to that eventually, but you got a head start on this whole program back 10 years ago, I think.
I think it's geographically oriented.
Yeah.
So there's choice here and there's opportunities for that. We're sensitive to other Vermont communities that maybe don't have that and need it.
Yeah.
But for 3 and 4-year-olds, we're talking about 3 and 4-year-olds, this is the number. Back in the day, if you go way back, we had 0.
Yes.
Now we have 300, a little more. At 0.46 of an equalized equals about 140. It didn't all come to us in one place. We didn't get to 300. It's been it's been growing over time and a 2-year average.
Right.
So that's a big that's a big component or a significant component of those 90 additional equalized.
Yeah, because I looked at the ADM.
Sorry. I just wanted to, the average daily membership, is that a number that we submit to the state, or is that somehow another calculation that they give to us? Because when I look through the spreadsheet, John shared the spreadsheet with me as well, and how they calculated equalized pupils. It seemed like there wasn't a significant change in the factors, like the factor that was taken out, for example, to reduce the number of pre-K students to, 141 or something because they only count for 0.46. It didn't seem like those factors changed all that much, but what seemed to really change was that base average daily membership. And I was just surprised that even though I know you're saying that we're building up over a 2-year rolling average, it still seems like a very big jump in our average daily membership. And is there some change in how we're reporting? Did we really see that many more students in a given year? I still was just struggling with it, even looking at the spreadsheet.
So ADM, the ADM calculation is done as of October 1st, and we submit our current enrollments. These are actual seated students. And that then gets put together with the formula that Alex talked about to compute equalize because of the different weightings. And the weight, that population can significantly change, as well as what was averaged into the previous year. So it's hard to make a direct, strong correlation to the actual ADM and equalized, although there should be some trend data there that goes with an increase or a significant decrease. And again, if we go back to the equalized on the state side, you can see that equalized is diminishing by 2.1%, although what we know is that enrollments are pretty more significantly outpacing that number. So anyway, I don't know that I'm totally getting to your answer. I think that the best next step would be to give a little bit more clarity to the board around how that equalize is being calculated or how it's being arrived at. It is a complicated formula. I don't want to make it sound like it's really simple. I wish it was. But we've also been working to vet it and make sure that it's current. It's important to us because we do not want to have something that's arrived at this year that gets corrected adversarially next year, right? Because that could be very significant to us. And again, we believe at the present time that with all of the questions and the checking that we've done, that this is a strong and appropriate equalized number at the moment.
Can I ask 2 more questions? Okay, so getting back to the pre-K numbers, in the current year and the previous year, the pre-K numbers did not change a whole lot, so I was confused about whether they were actually a factor in this increase or not. That's something that, I don't know if you need to respond or just think about that.
Well, they're certainly a factor, but just because of the enrollment is there doesn't mean that you get the equalized because
Right.
it's on a 2-year.
2-year.
So you got to look deeper to the calculation.
Yeah.
Because if you increase 50, you aren't going to get 50 in the next
Right.
year. You're going to get 20. You're
About
gonna,
25.
That's right.
Yeah,
And then so that's a big part of the calculation determination.
yeah,
Yeah.
okay. And another question, did we revise our data to the Agency of Education in between the time period when we, let's see, December 19th and until when we got this new sheet?
So did we revise this information from the state based on the CLA information that we got?
Right, but what I meant was,
Equalized.
did we update in any way our ADM counts to them or to any other element?
We
of
don't,
equalized
that
people?
doesn't happen.
We don't.
We're not authorized to do that. Nobody else does it. You don't shore up ADM. It's done as of the October, I think, 15th. I said
Right.
October 1st, but October 15th
Okay.
collection.
So let me sum it up for myself. The changes that we saw from December 19th till now, 2430 equalized pupils to 2513 equalized pupils the change is entirely due to something going on at the Agency of Education. Is that correct?
No, it's entirely connected to the things that are happening in South Burlington.
Right, but they use the same data. It sounds like they used the same data to come up with 2430.
No. That 2430 was an estimate that I did.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Very crude.
That's
Great.
right.
I knew we would go up a little, and what I did in a very crude sense, I looked at last year's ADM versus last year's equalized pupils, and I saw an increase in this year's ADM, and I applied that same increase to the equalized pupils this year, and I came up with 2430. And when we ever came up with 2512, I was like, where did this number come from?
Yeah.
I think a lot of it has to do with, we increased enrollments in ADM last year, but we only got to count half of it because
Yes.
it was a 2-year moving average.
Yep.
And then this year, we got to keep all of that increase, plus we got another strong year with, I think, 30 or 40 more kids that we got to count half of. And there's also a lot of other stuff going on in this formula that if you really want to see it, you're going to have to spend hours in the spreadsheets. But there's the weightings for ELL and state place students and limited English proficiency and the equalization ratio itself. When they get all around done with it, then they take in and multiply the number they get by like 94% or something. Whereas last year, I think it was 93%. So that equalization ratio gave us another percent on this calculation.
Wow.
The state did not come up with that 2430 John Aubin did.
Okay, no, thank you.
And it was wrong,
Thank you
I'm
for the
sorry,
clarification.
but-
No, it's,
And in the past, when we've been in the early stages of budget development, this is not atypical of us to make some assumptions
Yeah.
based on what we think is gonna happen with CLA. But I will tell you, John Stewart before John Aubin, along with myself, is we're probably too conservative, but it's better to be
yeah.
in that vein, I think, out of the gate initially than the other way around. So that's a great question, thanks.
If I might just quick question. With the ELL, does the state provide specific compensation for that, or is that rolled into the equalized pupil count?
It's rolled into the equalized pupil, so you get a fraction of the addition, which comes back in the revenue, yep.
Just one more question, David. Is our ELL population on a steeper trend or trajectory than general enrollment?
I don't know that.
Okay.
I would be remiss to, I can look at that, but I just will tell you, I know we have 196 and we're third in the state.
Yeah.
And I couldn't tell you what the past trend data is or what the percentage allocation is, but.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay, so again, this is the same factors, and it results in that 0.81% increase in the tax rate. Moving on, what I want to do, and again, this is in response to citizens advisory as well as school board members, I wanted to give some highlight back on budget initiatives and requests that happened in the previous year. So the next 4 slides are going to be about initiatives that were considered last year, initiatives that we proposed last year and were funded, initiatives that we proposed last year but were not funded, and then of those initiatives that were removed last year, the items that we'd like to pursue this year, and they're included in the recommendation. Okay? So the first out of the gate is the initiatives that we shared with you last year. And again, I'm not going to read through all of these, but again, this is important just to say that we were, again, thinking around how we can continue to make and support, the needs of students. So from preschool coordination through para support, having some additional office support in HR for family medical leave. Again, these were all of the supports in here that you had in here. And again, I don't want to be too quick here, but again, I don't want to necessarily read every one of those. Okay, and the next then page are items from that list that were actually funded. And so there was dollars that went towards the pre-K program. There was some professional learning money that we use, et cetera. We didn't add all, we had a 0.5 position total expense for HR to support the growing needs to stay compliant with ACA, Family Medical Leave, and Vermont Family Leave. Software, classroom teachers, all the way down to supplies as a result of adding teachers at the various schools. So those are items that were funded last year. Go ahead, John. So initiatives not funded last year, and then some of the status. So again, we included the $36,000 in the budget, and again, that was at a 0.5. We talked about having some additional flexible pathways and partnership for business work and CDC. Again, that was not that is not requested in this budget. Inclusion, again, not. Math support here at the middle school, not. The makerspace or small amounts of money to travel there, no. We had money for the $15,000 in playground. That was actually came through the Rick Marcotte PTO, made the donation and have accomplished that. Triple E, again, not requested. The high school and the middle school needs assessment. We had $40,000 in there. This is the $35,000, and it's being included in the 19 budget. Central administration, again, not included. Administrative sub-coverage, again, we had gone for that. There was $20,000 in contracted services for special projects and things of that nature to support. And then the district communication coordinator was not requested, but is in the proposed 19, and you'll see that. Items that were reduced from the 18 budget that are now in. I think go ahead, John, you skipped back. Yeah. That are now in the FY19 proposed budget and presented at the 19. So again, here is what's included, the 36 for the HR support, contracted service, and the high school, middle school needs assessment. I want to be really clear about this. What we're currently doing that was approved was $40,000 for a deeper dive on the mechanical, electrical, and structural analysis of the high school and the middle school. $35,000 is being requested and included in the 19 budget so that we can appropriately evaluate, visit, and come to a recommendation on what facility upgrades are then needed in which the facility then can support electrically, mechanically, and structurally. So that is currently in there. How are we doing, Martin? You okay so far?
Yep.
Okay. Go ahead. So then this now gets at the revised. And again, hard to see, and I apologize for that. So our budget now, as a result of adding those $312,000 of the items that I just spoke to you about, then brings our budget increase to 0.68%. Same CLA, the same now new equalized, which then gets us to a residential tax rate with the CLA included of 1.74% increase. That equals on $100,000, $28 more here. It is then $64 on the average condo. Condos have risen a little bit. And then on the home, it's $92 additional. Again, those factors then of the whole sheet are summarized here. And again, just pulling in those factors. Okay. Some of the rationale for the recommendations, again, based on feedback from the budget advisory and board members, wanted to give you a little bit more here, and certainly board members, if you have questions, ask. Communication coordinator, again, a lot of folks, every teacher, administrator do as much as they possibly can to communicate the things that are happening and celebrating student successes. But one of the things we recognize is that there's still missed opportunities, including opportunities to communicate with the public about things that are happening in the school board realm as well. Obviously, many of you know that board members have maintained a Facebook page and have tried to really work hard at doing that, but this works to maybe put some additional resources to those areas. This changes from the December 19th, we had in a proposed bond, we had some pavement repair, and because that doesn't pass the 20-year life, because you're going to likely rip it up, then we've moved that from the bond back into the operating budget. Co-teaching position at Orchard, again, increasing needs, but this will provide professional intervention for students with special education needs and a partnered approach between the classroom teacher and the special education services. Again, good tier one instruction is often what we talk about there. Further assessments of our buildings. Again, we're trying to really be mindful of where we may be making changes or could be recommending changes in master planning. We don't want any of our facilities to be unsafe, trip hazards, or any related asbestos related. So Orchard has got some carpet and tile replacement in the library and some other areas as a result of being worn, so there's dollars there. Our behavior coach is also an area that we're seeing, again, continued response. This does not stop our trauma work that we're doing at Rick Marcotte. Again, that's positive, but again, this continues to support kind of some of the behavior needs that we're seeing. Some safety and security software, again, this goes along with kind of our camera system, but making sure we're compliant around making sure student data and information is appropriate and safe. Go ahead, John. A nursing service change at Chamberlain. Chamberlain has been a school that has a 0.6 FTE nurse. The nurse is a registered nurse. And we also have we've had a .6 LPN, licensed practical nurse there. The reality is that the licensed practical nurse really can't operate solely without nurse supervision. So this is proposing to make a change to increase the nurse to a full-time at Chamberlain and reduce the .6 FTE LPN. That likely won't be the increase because there's an offset there. We just haven't fully plugged that number. That would be the expense of, we believe that's a portion of the expense that might be able to be trued up slightly, but again, that's the need there. And then as a result of past announcements, our assistant principal, Pat Phillips, retiring. At the same time, our curriculum area supervisor in guidance, Tim Wiles, retiring. They're the master planners on the schedule for the high school, and there's some redundancy with both of them, but they're both leaving. So this does put some dollars into having them do some shadowing and support along the way. Again, that may be high, but again, we're wanting to be smart about making sure that that redundancy can carry on. Okay?
Could you go back to a question about the BCBA behavior coach? Is that essentially expanding the pilot that we have going on in Central School right now?
Essentially, yes, but it's also a need-based request as well.
But it's the same kind of...
It's the same kind of concept, and we'll be using and deploying the same types of things we're learning from the pilot that are effective at Rick Marcotte to Orchard.
All right, so actually, I might as well ask the question now regarding that. So at some point, is the concept, as I thought I understood it, with bringing in this pilot and taking this different approach, is that that's going to decrease our need for one-on-one paraeducators. Do we have an anticipation of a decrease in FTEs for the paraeducators at some point because of what we're working on there? Is that still in the cards?
Yep, it is. And we've seen some we've definitely seen positive results since we started the program and evaluating the data from the beginning of the school year. Again, we're now into a good portion of the year. We're four and a half months or so into the data, but we don't have it fully fleshed out. As we move forward, we're seeing positive results, and we're seeing less dependency on adding support people. We've had many instances where likely in the past years we would have had to add some support, but we've been able to avert that because of the program that we're doing. And so we think that's a positive trend, and we're also have a need at Orchard to be able to be responsive, but don't want to be simply adding, kind of the one-on-one support.
Okay.
I want to be clear that I don't want to say that we won't need one-on-one support, but that's on a case-by-case basis, but we're really working hard to have that not be the case.
Okay, thanks.
David, I'm not sure it's part of this. Are you taking clarifications from the audience at this point or not?
Go ahead, Jerry.
So, do we have any feel for how many students that behavior coach would be associated with? So, if we talk about student to faculty ratios, is there a ratio for this behavior coach number of students? To get an idea of how many students are being impacted by this one position.
Well, I think, our desire is that the behavior person is working with the entire staff and trying to ensure that as students, come into our buildings, are being regulated and teachers supporting them appropriately, children appropriately. So you could say it's a pure, relationship to the total population, to the behavior coach around really trying to make sure that we're adapting. I think that's a little bit of a stretch, because within each of our schools, we have a population of children that are definitely having some needs at certain times. And so that might be the more accurate number of affected students in that ratio between the behavior person.
I'm just trying to get an idea of how many students you would classify as having challenging behaviors in the school system.
We're currently, we continue to collect that data. And we're going to keep watching that. It does have some variability. We'd like to see that really diminish to a point where we won't need the same amount of support. Again, you're going to see in just a few minutes our FTE counts, and again, versus previous years where we've been up 15, 16, 17 FTEs on a year-over-year basis. We're up, I think, 0.81 or something of an FTE with doing some of these additions. So there is some diminishing of resources that we're seeing as a result, albeit in different places.
I remember last year in some of the packets, as many as 20% of students in some of the classes in the elementary schools were considered as challenging, if you will. And so I'm just trying to get a feel for, you know, the percent. If it's a moving average, that's fine, but I think it's important for the community to know that the school system is dealing with a reasonably high percentage of students who we consider to have challenging behavior issues.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we had that data in last year's packet, if I recall right. I don't know if there's a reason we can't have that again.
Nope, that's right. I mean, again, when you don't have a defined program, we gathered the information in a less scientific way. We now have more scientific way of collecting. So I think we still have concerning numbers. That said, we think we're approaching it in the right way, and our hope is that we'll see a diminishment of that dependency. So with our newer data, again, what might have been what we would have qualified for somebody who's experiencing trauma, and kind of our calibration, if you and I were to calibrate the same, was a little different when we first began. We're in a much better place. So we'll soon to have that. Again, we're 4.5 months into that collection. And again, we're feeling positive about that direction, but at the same time, we don't still have enough.
Diane?
So as we bring on the contracted, or I'm sorry, the BCBAs onto our own staff, are we reducing any of the contracted BCBA supports that?
There is some of that that's happening. So in some cases, what Diane's referring to, we have contracted services that we go out for. And in this case, it's more advantageous and we can get a better service for bringing those services in. So there is some offset there.
I mean, is that an offset that we can uncover? I mean, that you can be able to point out at some point? Because I mean, that's helpful for justifying the BCBA and for what we're doing at Central as well.
We can show you that. Again, part of that's in the Special Education Service Plan, which is also factored into the revenue side of the revenue line that you see. That's part of your budget workshop sheet as well, which is again not changing by much, only $4,000 or 0.04%, but it is attributed in that factor.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so next page gets you back to, again, this is the exact same page, just a little bit easier to read. Again, the $312,000 in increase, our budget increasing proposed here in this at 0.68. As I just said, the revenue, again, with the added revenue, as I said, 0.04% increase. Again, you take the total amount minus the revenue, gets you to the education funding amount of $37,555,772, and again, up 0.89%. And divide that by our equalized, and again, our equalized, as we said earlier, going up 3.97%, and get you at a net spending per equalized pupil of that versus the previous, our budgeted year, down 2.96, and then factoring in the common level appraisal, again, which is another divisor of the CLA, gets you to $1.74, 1.74%, not $1.74, 1.74%. Questions there? Okay. Next page, again, this is John Aubin's work, but what he's provided, again, this was also some question from some of our folks asking about if the budget were to change by either reducing by 200,000, by 100,000, or adding, respectively, what would happen to the budget percentage and what would happen to the residential tax rate with the CLA, what would it be? So if you made the change on a reduction of any, or an addition, this would be what the residential tax rate would be. Okay, not, that's what it would be. Okay, again, just giving some folks some bracketing here. Again, I already kind of started out with this, but what this budget does is talking about those opportunities, continues to provide that professional development to our staff that needs to continue the good work. And again, a good example here is personalized learning plans, proficiency-based graduation, math aptitude, literacy aptitude, science aptitude, all the things that we need to stay on top of. We work those into professional development. Continues to utilize our assessment data to look at how we need to respond. And again, there's areas, even though our district performs well, we still have areas that we are recognizing that are in need. And so it does allow that. And again, as I said, safeguarding and making sure our buildings are working effectively. And again, it talks about utilizing that bond. Okay, John. Again, this same thing that you've seen before, although with different factors. The tax rate calculation, this is an important slide because, again, what we've said is we're in control of this. Our revenue obviously is associated with some of that work that happens and what we need to do. Property yield was set. So this is going up slightly, going up slightly, going down. Again, this is the capture by the state on that kind of 8% reduction. Common level appraisal, again, negligible change, just slight downward. And equalized pupils, which we've talked a lot about, pretty significant. And now is frozen, although nothing's significantly frozen until the legislature adjourns and can make some adjustments. So all of those factors play in to a property tax rate that we're currently in the administration's recommendation to reduce.
That number didn't look like it got updated from a previous version.
Which one,
Sorry,
John?
David, that should be 1.74%, not 0.66%.
Oh, right, yep.
Sorry about that.
Yep, good catch. Thanks, John. So again, this would go back to your tax rate increase of 174. This was to an earlier slide. Thank you for that catch. We'll make that change before it gets presented out. Okay. So some quick budget factors. Again, I want to be quick here. 0.68 on the overall budget, tax rate of 1.74 over the current year. Most of this is, again, primarily due to the property yield adjustment and a little bit of that CLA. Average condos have changed a little, and with that, that's what they would pay on an increase. The average home has changed. That's what they would pay on that change. And again, the tax rate, as I said earlier, is subject to change based on legislative action. Okay, John? This factors in the administration recommended budget of tonight at the 0.7 increase and shows accordingly what would be the 10-year average with that calculated in on our 10-year average tax rate. Again, you can see some fluctuations there and also on our 10-year budget. I think important to note that you can see there's not necessarily a direct correlation to what you spend and what your tax rate is. And again, there's a lot of folks that have questions and concerns about it just doesn't make sense sometimes, but in fact, that's what's associated with the property yield as a main driver. Okay? This is just some visuals based on our tax rate history. Again, what I would say here is pretty flat. Again, this happens to be, we're slightly below the 3 of the last 4 years. But again, just you can see that visually. Go ahead, John. Our staffing and enrollment next, we're going to just quickly talk about at kind of the very specific grade level. This is Central School. Central School has had, this past year we had 20 classroom teachers. We predicted a much higher kindergarten than we actually had come in. But again, we had 20. This proposed budget and recommended budget brings them back down to 19. Again, gives you the averages in their class sizes and the average in that particular school. Go ahead.
David,
that's Chamberlain, I'm sorry.
Do you want questions about this right now, or do you want questions about staffing at the end of the staffing section?
It's up to Martin.
No, go ahead.
Sorry, it's hard for me to raise my hand. I'm sorry. So yeah, my question here is that we're reducing by a teacher, which is going to leave us with an estimated class size in second grade of 21.7. which means there's not a lot of room if that increases. So I'm just a little concerned that, I guess my bigger question, because there was another situation at Chamberlain later on in the presentation, a very similar 21.5 for the second grade level. And I guess my question is, how many contingency teachers are built in, if any? Where is contingency built into the budget? I'm a little bit concerned that we might be putting ourselves in the same position that we've been in a couple of times over the last 4 years, where we're trying to scramble after school has started to add teachers back. And I just wanted to make sure that we were properly resourced to do that if we decide we have to. So I guess it's really a question for you and John, David. Is there a contingency teacher or two built in somewhere in the budget? This presentation was a very summarized presentation versus, the pages that go into the line item detail. So it's hard to tell what contingency is built in.
Very good. Good question, Bridget. So there is a contingent teacher built into the budget. And again, I recognize that anytime we make a reduction, even in some cases, we've had volatility in some grades in past years where some of those class sizes, get up there. And we've tried to be responsive. This, again, is a recommendation by the administration that we feel is appropriate at 19. Again, school board certainly can make a recommendation to make a change. We think that by keeping Chamberlain at 15 and Orchard at 22, given their enrollment upticks, if there is a need, the contingent teacher would go here. But again, looking at the numbers and looking and assessing kind of where we are in support of students, this is again the administration's recommendation that we would be fine here. And again, if the contingent teacher would be needed, then it's likely it would be slighted to Rick Marcotte. Okay.
A follow-up question on that. Just looking at Central, I mean, I assume that the administration made this judgment, but if you could explain it a little bit further, that there was a consideration of having, on the small end, the fifth grade classes. If we went with 3 teachers in the fifth grade, you'd have, what, 21 and
That's right.
21.33 students per class.
Yeah.
A little bit smaller actually than what you're accepting in the second grade, but I know that there are judgment calls made
That's
about
right.
the cohort.
Yep.
Can you explain that a little bit further?
Yeah, and I want to be clear. I mean, we've spent a considerable, a good amount of time with the administrators, but how the administrators deploy the resources, i.e. the classroom teachers, is truly up to the administrator and the teachers on how best to do that based on where the students are with needs. And so, Martin, you bring up a good point. I mean, that may be an area of the change. We also, again, we're going to talk briefly about the McGibbon report, and that's the looking at demographic. We're using kindergarten numbers, and again, we thought we'd have a lot higher there, but this is again what we're using based on Jerry McGibbon's the demographic data at 49. So if those things significantly change, the resources could be redeployed. The fifth grade classroom teacher, could be redeployed as well. So again, we've always been had some fluidity there, although when you get to the smaller number of students in any one grade, the volatility is much greater. And again, I mean by 30 isn't too big in one classroom, but 15 becomes a little too small. And so that's kind of the volatility in the number of students, which is in part what we're talking about under master planning and visioning.
David, in these classes, are we talking about one person in the room, or is there an assistant who's also in the room?
In some cases, Jerry, there may be some assistants in there. There may be other adults in there providing support to an individual student.
Okay.
There may be some co-teaching that might be going on with a math coach that might be happening, but that's in the effort to really make sure that the classroom teacher is able to provide the best possible instruction without other adult support.
Okay.
Okay, so that's Rick Marcotte. Next is Chamberlain. And as I said just a bit ago, again, we added a teacher this year at 15. This keeps them at 15, although this should have an asterisk here, which it does, and it simply points down to the very bottom that that classroom teacher is really a dual certified teacher, spending kind of half of their time supporting classroom and the other half providing support for special education for that particular, for kindergarten. So,
David, can you say one more word about how that's working? Because I have to say, I'm not sure that I understood it fully when we approved the way that this was working previously. So are you saying that really right now what's happening at Chamberlain is there's a classroom of 24 and there's a classroom of, next year, if it were 49 students, there would be a classroom of 24 kindergartners and a classroom of 25, and then there would be this third teacher who would kind of float between the two classrooms plus provide some special education support? Because that sounds like a very different model. No. If we're going to carry that forward, I understood why we did it this year, but if we're going to carry that forward, that sounds like a different model than what we're doing in other schools.
And again, Holly, these are good questions. We'll make note because, again, these will be good FAQs too, Bridget. But what happens here is the classroom teacher, the additional third teacher, actually provides literacy and math instruction in their own classroom. And when they go out to art or music or physical education, they recombine for those things, while then the special educator does additional work in the area of special education support services. So again, I think it's consistent with what was requested around making sure that the number of children in the kindergarten classroom, stayed within the appropriate level under our G6 policy. And so that, I think, remains to be constant. And again, I contemplated, based on Chamberlain's number, at 17.1 per classroom, whether I could make a reduction. But I think, again, given what we know on the McGibbon report and the enrollment fluctuations that we've seen uptick there, we felt that was an appropriate administrative decision to keep that resource there.
Yeah, and I wasn't advocating for getting rid of the resource. My question was just how it's being deployed and whether you feel like it's, and maybe this is a better question for Holly, but whether we feel like it's really working in this configuration or whether it should look more like the other schools in terms of, 3 regular classroom teachers. Because right now it sounds like we're just doing something, and maybe this is an innovation that's working really well, and maybe it should be, things maybe should be done differently at other schools. I don't know. It just feels different than what we're doing at other schools, and we haven't really had sort of a report on how it's working or not working in this configuration.
Fair. I think it's great that that question comes up. We can certainly, I'll ask Holly to provide a little bit more detail, so you'll see that pop up on FAQs. I would say that, when I made some recommendations about something different in this configuration, Holly's been extremely supportive, and I think her staff have been equally supportive of the way in which they've been approaching this way. It's provided additional support in special ed, as well as for the classroom side. So I think, again, unless I'm hearing something totally different, people are really quite happy with what's happening there. But I'll make sure we give you a little bit more update on that.
Okay.
Moving on to then Orchard. Orchard, as I said earlier, stays at the 22. Again, their enrollment, we've seen pretty significant increases. And right now, actually, we suspect that will be probably over 400, but this is, again, what we have on the, in the school right now. We're at, I think, 402. But again, this is based on the McGibbon report, which also has our kindergarten entry number in there as well. So at 22, and then you can see kind of where we are with that. So again, I've made no reduction there. Moving on to the middle school. Again, this is a good example of fluctuation in enrollment, but with eight core teachers in each of those grades, which have remained constant, you can see we're able to maintain that. Again, we'll have to keep watch of that, obviously, if enrollments went up significantly, but again, we're still within our a range that's appropriate. And so that's the middle school. At the high school, again, little hard to see our tuition students. They remain about almost on par with the same. McGibbon's report factored them into the various grades and didn't call them out. And so we could do the math for you to do that calculation, but we're about, I think, 196 students in tuition expected for next year. But again, a total enrollment about the same, just one student less. And then based on our core teachers, what that represents, and then the factor students per core teacher at that amount. Again, next page, page 28, brings you into a very, very busy sheet, but looks at Rick Marcotte, Chamberlain, and Orchard, and total elementary. Again, it's divided up, and you can see what's happening. Again, I spoke to you briefly about this top line of where we were with Rick Marcotte and core teachers. And again, you can see some of those areas that are changing. And you can see then the total enrollment. We've seen some resources that we've not filled there and are not likely to fill, but you'll see a total summary in just a minute. So again, you can see that for Chamberlain, same thing for Orchard. So again, slight down for Rick Marcotte, slight down for Chamberlain, slight increase for Orchard, and then overall district-wide slight, elementary-wise, that is slight downward on the FTE. Moving on to the middle school. Again, these titles are middle school, then the high school, then the district all together, the district, and then that overall summary. So pretty much the same at the middle school, a slight increase or by one at the high school. And then, again, looking at the district, I just simply move really over to the bottom right on the overall summary. I said earlier, we're about 0.8 FTE in addition with those things that we've talked about, including from things like the communication person, et cetera, in there. So quick notable items in this budget. Again, important. This was a noted request from the budget advisory. In this budget represents a reduction in our health plan into our new plans. So there's some money that's saved here of $550,156 as a result of our solar array that's now in full function that sits on the landfill. There's a co-sponsored use with the city is $20,000 due to see in our electrical rebate. It maintains funding for our safety and security items. Again, updating our camera system. Again, big chunk of money, but it's, again, expensive to do the things that we need to do on security cameras, locks, and keys. It does include us going out to bond for our stewardship items to pay for various capital upgrades. So that's the total of that. $325,000 is for the restroom facility that is on the Munson field that we've been without for a long time. There was a question, by the way, that came up from the board, I think, at the last one about the Munson field, whether or not it, I think it's on the page 5, John.
Yeah, page 5,
number 13, how much revenue does the district take in? And so it does give you a snapshot that it does provide. I would make note that our location is desirable, and although not as desirable when you don't have bathrooms for people to use that are close by. Again, we often don't get a population of folks that come by because of the distance that they may have to travel to come into one of our buildings or to a porta potty that isn't often necessarily totally desirable. So this budget includes that $950,500 on a stewardship bond. It does include $150,000 of that is included for the upgrade as a result of this refit of the space that the city, as a result of the city exit of the city library. And it does also represent a loss of revenue from the city as well on the $64,788. There is no additional money that's going into our capital reserve fund because we're trying to do the bond, but there will remain the $300,000 in there for our stewardship budget in the event that there are significant additional items that are needed. The other part is, although we hope the bond would be successful, if we're not able to be successful with the bond, then the $300,000 would be deployed to help kind of triage those things that are most needed to be addressed. Quick budget recap again, budget increase of 0.68, revenue 0.04 increase, tax rate 1.74, 190 tuition students estimated, average 64 in the average condo, 92 in the average home. The income sensitivity percentage is going to decline from 2.72 to 2.52. So people that are income sensitized, we don't exactly know that. We believe it's about $140,000 or less. We'll be able to divide that by then 2.52%, and whichever is greater on their income versus that percentage would be what they would pay if they are underneath that threshold. We have a large population in Vermont, and certainly in South Burlington are income sensitized. I think a fundamental observation is that we're moving from a property tax funded system to an income tax funded system. And again, I've had more in-depth conversations with some of you, including some of the budget advisory folks that are more closely connected to some of that. And then some additional places for people to find information. We really do want to point people to our website. We're going to keep working hard at updating that. And in there, information not only about our budget, but also about performance and how we're doing, as well as city information that we hope people can pay attention to as well. So let me pause, Martin. There are other things that you might want to go into the report, but we kind of think I don't necessarily need to go to the exhaustive entire report unless you feel like board members would like to talk about some other items that are included in your packet for questions.
Yeah, I did have a couple questions.
Yep.
I mean, I don't think we need to, I mean, it's similar, we've already gone through it last couple times, I think, actually, a lot of this information that comes after the questions. But I did have, I would request, and maybe you've done it since I looked at it, when you get into the ratios, if you're able to update it with our current information, because I think that you just have it through our current year. I mean, to project
right.
it, to project what the ratios look like.
So John, can you just go to that, could you go to like page 37 for a second?
Is it page 10? I thought it was close to the end, like page 57, 58, 59, where we talk about students per teacher on 57.
Okay, I got you. I know where you're at.
Students per para
So-
educator. If those could just be
Yeah,
updated, given projections.
We'd love to be able to do that.
I know we
Martin.
can't do the comparison. We can't, won't have the information for.
We won't know where everyone else is, right? We're the highest in the state. We won't know the average. We won't know the lowest. We would know where we are.
Right, right.
And we can
But I
certainly.
think that would be an
Sure.
interesting piece of information, because
Certainly can do that.
presumably it's in the right trend direction.
Sure. My hesitation to that is it creates some level of, if ours get larger and you don't show it corresponding, it's really important then that we'll have to say. It only represents, the other bars are state factors, again.
No, I wouldn't put it, but I would just even have
Show
an,
us only?
even have an asterisk on the bar and put it
Okay.
in the bottom saying,
Yeah.
we're projecting this to be such and so for South Burlington.
Fair, we can certainly do that. And again, what you're seeing here is the students per teacher, and where we are. The next slide, actually, just while we're here, brings in the paraeducator support, one back, shows where we are. And again, this is an area that, we're working hard based on all of the things we talked about before around, whether it's our pilot program or BCBA, but we do want kids to be able to be in the least restrictive environment, receiving instruction in the best possible way with the least amount of kind of adult surroundings. And again, that's an area that we're watching. And so we can certainly do that, Martin.
So, and one other question, I don't know if I clarified this before, as far as in these ratios, is that looking at this compared to the equalized pupils or students in seats?
No, this is actual students in seats.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, shouldn't it also look at it relative to equalized pupils?
You can, but I mean, we don't necessarily talk about ratios in a way that that focuses on fractionalize students. I mean, if I'm here, I'm a student of need, and so, I don't know if there's data that does
I
that.
think that would add confusion to the whole thing, because I think we have more equalized pupils than we have seated students.
Right.
And then we'll get, we'll be reporting a teacher's teaching to 18 kids when she's really only teaching to 14.
Yeah,
That makes me
but
queasy.
you're teaching to higher need kids. That's what the equalized pupil is supposed to be trying to get at. So when you have ELL students particularly, in other categories.
The state reports all these numbers based on seated students.
Okay.
So if
Based on
we
ADM
decide-
collection, really.
ADM
Okay,
collection.
yeah. All right.
If we were to go do our own thing, then you couldn't no longer
I'm not, again,
compare
I'm not,
yourself to other
I'm not
districts.
disagreeing that it would be of interest to see
Yeah,
that.
but if it adds more confusion than it's worth, I think that's fine.
David, can I clarify? I've asked this question before and I'm still struggling. Students per paraeducator, are you simply taking the total number of students in the school system divided by the total number of paraeducators? Or at some point, can you break it down to the number of students who are actually working with the paraeducators? I'm trying to understand if there's a difference. Does everybody understand that question?
Yeah.
This data does not come from the school district. This
Okay.
data comes from the State of Vermont
Okay.
Agency of Education, and the way they do it is they take the total number of seated students and divide by the total number of staff in these categories. And, we could do differently, but like I said, it would no longer be comparable across the state. Which I think it's important to say that, what does 5 kids mean? It's in a vacuum, but if it's, everybody else is 3 and 4, then I think that's something you can say, we're doing a good job with that.
The reason I'm asking is if 20% of students are using paraeducators, it tells me a lot about what that ratio means.
Mhm.
Okay, that's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
Right.
It helps me understand what that number means.
Agreed. So,
Chris, I'm sorry.
Is, like, along what Martin said, is that maybe why, like, Orchard, the seated students is the same at 397, but they are requested to get 2 more FTEs? Is that maybe because
that's right.
the equalized students maybe are more English language learners there?
Well, again, we want to be careful that we don't like individually identify needs, but definitely we've seen enrollment increase at Orchard, which you talked about. But in addition to that are also the ELL factors, state play student factors, all of those things that go into supporting that. And as a result, then what do we need to do to support? It's not always about the pure number of students either. It's about the makeup of instruction that the student needs to support them. And again, many of us have had, 15, individuals in front of us that feels bigger or feels really small based on their participation, their levels of understanding, based on the content and what we're trying to teach them, right? And so it does add those resources, and we're definitely seeing some additional needs at Orchard. And that is in part why those additional resources are going there, or being requested to go there.
Other questions from the board?
So,
Or do you want to?
no, that's good. I do want to just end by the fact that this is the administration's recommendation. We are able to pull up the same worksheet, and if the board wants to make some recommended changes, you could see what those results might be. We don't have a ton of time. The next time we meet next week will be yet another iteration, so I'm looking for some additional direction. I've heard some questions that have come up from the board that you'd like a little bit of additional clarification, either in FAQs, but would come back to this group. Again, I want to reiterate that this is a year that we feel is really, in the state, I think there's some recalibration going on in the state, and we're wanting to be actively participating in our system, providing opportunities that we feel are needed. At the same time, utilization of a bond, which I'm kind of, if I was to recommend something different in the past, I would have recommended that we do some bonding in earlier years, because we, on average, have carried $525,000, as you saw, on our operating budget to maintain facilities. that has not been apples to apples across other districts. That's not exactly what we requested. If we had stayed to our stewardship plan on a year-over-year basis, it would be probably much closer to about $800,000 on a run rate because of the age of our facilities. But most of my other colleagues are not including those, have not included those factors into those operating budgets. And I think it's not appropriate for the taxpayers of today to pay for an upgraded burner system that's going to last 20 years, that it's going to be on the backs of the taxpayers next year and not spread out over 20 years. Again, part of this is a conversation that's also I've had with the Budget Advisory Group. So I think the bonding component is really a right one. I'd love for the legislature or us to have some sources that can help maintain facilities. I worry about, 50-plus-year-old buildings, which is pretty much across all of Vermont, how we maintain them, and the ratio of the operating budget for children and how we care for the buildings. So this budget does pull in some dollars. We're not doing a lot. We're trying to maintain and get kind of back on track to stewardship, with the understanding that we may have some bigger bonding requests coming in the very near future that might be this school for added gym and the high school for some added improvements that will follow from some of the things that we identified. So it's in that kind of layout that that we're making this recommendation for those associated items. So up to you guys on where you'd like to go, Martin.
Alex, go ahead.
Just a quick question back on page 15, near the top where we've got 49,293,666 for the preliminary budget, and then below that is the 3,112. Is that 3,112 the bond?
The 3,112 are the additions that we made to the budget, and that goes along with page
12, 13, and 14?
12, 13, and 14. Thank you, Martin. Okay?
Okay.
Before that number was the 98,000.
Yep.
And part of what I heard last time from some board members was that we'd like to know where you were with initiatives that you proposed last year at this time.
Yeah.
Which ones were funded, which ones were not funded,
Okay.
and what you're proposing in this budget in that regard.
Mm-hmm.
So, what I believe that we instructed administration last time, we made two main points. One was to provide us a recommendation with a budget that provides the educational service that the community expects. And the second, which came a little bit later, that Steve offered, was that you don't go, what does it look like to go to 2% increase on the tax rate? Now, we got to the 2% increase by not further cutting, but by some fortuitous events as far as calculations on the equalized pupils. But I mean, I think in my view, I don't see obvious things, at least and somebody else maybe on the board has a different view, certainly would like to hear that, that jump out at me as easy cuts to make, easy things to put off. Just looking at your list of the additions, they all, I think, are well justified. At least that's 1/5 of the board's opinion. So in any event, Steve or Alex, if you want to weigh in on any additional direction at this point. Or I'm sorry, and Bridget on the phone here. You still with us, Bridget?
Yeah, I'm still here. I guess I would like to see, really I'm feeling like there is, this is a great sort of overview of the budget. I'm hoping, I don't know if it's the next meeting or if it's the 17th when we have for action supposedly on our agenda on the budget, to revisit the detailed budget presentation, the line item budget presentation. So, for example, I think there are some questions, like Elizabeth's question about, that original line item budget we saw about a month ago where teacher salaries were going up more than what we had said contractually. I'm not sure we ever got a clear answer on why that was. And without seeing the line items, I can't see things like, where contingency is built in. And I need to get to a level of comfort that there is enough contingency in here, and that we're not sort of using this fortuitous equalized pupil number as almost a windfall to sort of add in some of these things we've been wanting to add in without making some tough choices. Because I'm a little concerned that we may be, not making a tough choice between, for example, keeping a classroom teacher at Rick Marcotte while we're adding in some of these other things, which granted seem well justified, like the communications director. I'm the first to raise my hand and say we could really use, a half-time person on communications because a lot of us spent a lot of time last year trying to communicate about the budget and negotiations and all the things. So it would be extremely helpful. But if we don't have any contingency teachers in here and we don't have any of that resource in here, and it comes down to a decision between, something like that and maybe some of the other things, I just want to make sure that those are called out clearly. And I'm not sure that those trade-offs are necessarily called out in this presentation.
Yeah.
So I would just assume that at some point before we actually go to vote, that we get an updated version of the line item budget so that we can, press on any final questions before we have to actually vote.
We can certainly, we have it available, we can make it available, and again, I've worked with John exclusively on it, and again, those particular areas that you request or you're asking about are certainly there. I mean, I hesitate to get too deep into again, I think it's appropriate that it's all available and any questions you have, but on going a line-by-line presentation on the budget, I've gotten a fair amount of feedback that in some cases this has been long and hard as it is, but we certainly have taken things into account, and there's a fair amount of moving parts for even the altercation, even the changes that we made in this now administrative recommendation. It changes when you do some of these changes. It does change the revenue projections. When you take something out, then it changes the revenue projections based on what you might be getting reimbursed from, either more or less. So we've really worked hard to try to articulate that, but I'm certainly open to the board now really digging into that and making sure that you feel comfortable about some of those things, like, that line item on the teachers, and you understand why that's moving the way it is.
Yeah, I don't think it has to be a presentation of that line item. It has to be, we have to get the information in advance of what, we're meeting again next Wednesday?
Yes.
Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
We need to get it as soon as possible so that we can come armed with our questions. Is that right, Bridget? Is that what you're thinking?
That's exactly right, because, the public really did press us last year on line item, and that line item budget has to be available to them, ahead of the ballot time. And, if we haven't pressed on those questions, how are we supposed to answer them, when we start getting questions about it and they start pushing back on us? So, yeah, I don't feel like we need to spend 2 hours going through line item by line item, in a public session, as long as it's available, obviously, for the public in the budget book. But I would like us to have one more opportunity as a board to really ask some of those questions. And it's hard to do that without having the updated version, because, some things have kind of changed behind these summary pages. And it would just be helpful to see those changes.
Bridget, just for clarification, because I think
I visualizing what you're saying, and I completely agree. It would be very helpful now that we have a recommended budget. So what I think you're thinking is basically the income statement. So the revenues, kind of, the 10 kind of summary level revenues, 10 or 12 or so summary level expenses, what the 18 budget was, what the actual projection through year end 18 is, and then what the proposal for 19 is, and then maybe a percentage change 19 versus 18 projection.
Yes, it's a presentation we've seen before already. It's a set of spreadsheets that is set up already. It just hasn't been updated since we've had another iteration or two of the budget, the overall headline budget. And so I'm just asking for that backup. So yes, that's exactly what I'm asking. It's the same presentation that we've seen in the past. I'm not asking for anything new. I just want to make sure that we're seeing that detail before we're expected to vote, as opposed to after we vote and the budget book is all put together and presented to the public.
Yeah, great. So I think that's we're fine to do that, and make sure that's available right off for you. mean, I do think, again, board members, I mean, I'm making an administrative recommendation. If you feel that there's a desire, either now or as we move into the next meeting, that you'd like to see, again, a contingency teacher is, I've got it in the budget. I'm not counting it in the FTE, and I'm not putting in there. There are consequences of adding a contingency teacher later on if it's needed. But the other part of that is there's an obligation, if you include it, that I carry forward and I don't make reductions either. And that's also an expense to the district as well. But again, that's certainly within your purview. The other part I want to just be clear about is if I could predict education funding and the volatility, that would be great. But I mean, John's been at this business for a long time. I've been in it 29 years, and I've never seen any one year be the same. And even, I mean, back in the day when it was your own budget and it was your own kind of city or town obligation, it's a very different animal now with that property yield that moves around. So I'm sensitive to all of the moving parts, albeit enrollment and tuition. I'm sensitive to increases that might come in changes to a yield based on, Act 46 mergers that have happened or not, And so I'm sensitive to not putting in large programs that might have to alter in the future year. And an example might be, some folks might say, boy, it would really be nice if you could add foreign language in. That was an area that I had requested. But I think it would be a huge disadvantage to the students to put something in and only to take it out. So if younger kids get it in that 1 year, and then I have to take it away because of its expense to deploy it in three building locations. Would I like to do it? Absolutely. But I don't think that right now, given the volatility, it's really the right thing to do programmatically until we get some additional assurances and stability around education funding. And people may say, when is that going to come? I'd like it to come, and I'd love to see that. That said, I think this budget does provide the types of opportunities that we think are critically important for our kids to be successful, elementary through high school.
If I could provide sort of an executive summary reaction, and I've kind of put my fingers on 3 different pages here, and I think I'll single out 4 numbers. And I kind of wanted to get my fellow board members' reactions, and then if we could even get audience response. But, the first page I look at is page 4. It's sort of the fundamental unit of analysis, these equalized pupils. And if I look specifically at, fiscal 19, we're at 2513, basically 2,513. Last year we were at 2,417. It's a 4% increase year over year. So 5.5% over, last 5-year comparison. But if we look at just the 1 year comparison, it's a 4% increase in equalized pupils. So if I jump ahead to page 29, I'm going to go kind of back and forth here. And if I look at the lower right-hand corner, the overall staffing is going from 491.4 to 492.2. That's 0.8 of an FTE, 0.2%. So we're serving 4% more FTEs with 0.2% increase in staff, equalized pupils, 0.2 of an increase in staff. That's darn near flat. So I'd say that, again, my simplified way of thinking about it, that's fairly efficient. And then the last 2 numbers that I'd focus on are on page 20, where you do the 10-year averages of the tax rate. The last 2 columns is what's the tax rate increase been since 2010 each year, and what's actually it's the 3rd column and the 5th column. So it's the spending percentage increase in the budget year over year and the change in tax rate year over year. And then helpfully you also have the 10-year averages. So we're looking at a 0.7 increase in the dollar amount of spending versus a 10-year average of 2.65%. And there's a 1.74% increase in the tax rate, which I think you spent a fair amount of detail explaining why that's largely due to factors at the state level. And even then, that is below the 10-year average in the tax increases. So looking at those four things, the increase in the equalized pupils, the lack of increase in staff, and the relatively moderate increase in both dollar spending and the change in tax rate relative to 10-year averages, I'm satisfied that this is a pretty good budget.
Did you say you had 4 items?
Well, I'm sorry, so it was,
Three.
one is on page 6, the year-over-year increase in
Yep.
equalized pupils. 2 is on page 29, it's the,
Staff,
staff. And then 3 and 4 would be the dollar amount of spending and the
Yeah.
change in the tax rate. So those 4 numbers sort of stick out of my mind, and I'd say job well done.
The only footnote I would add to what you're saying is we don't know the actual change in the number of students. We know the equalized pupil number, but we don't know the actual change in the number of students. So comparing
Fair
the
comment.
ratio of staff in the system to students is biased by the fact that we don't know what the change in the number of students was. We only know the change in the equalized pupil number, which probably does not reflect the actual change in the number of students in the school system. So you're saying the efficiency is pretty good, and I'm saying is until we know the bodies, I'm not sure we can make that conclusion.
And again, the equalized pupils is supposed to be an understanding of the challenges of, how much resources we need to educate those students in their seats. I mean, for ELLs, it takes more, for secondary school, it takes more, et cetera. So I understand what you're saying, but it's not completely off to look at that equalized pupils. And
It's just like you have paraeducators to student ratios. I don't know how many students those paraeducators are working with. So if the actual number of students in the school system paraeducators is 25-1, but you're only dealing with 20% of those students, then that 25-1 ratio drops down to 5-1. That's a big difference than 25-1, okay? So it's a lot of numbers we're playing around with here, and I, for one, I've seen lots of numbers, and I'm always cautious about drawing conclusions until I know exactly what is meant by those numbers. So when we deal with
That's fair.
equalized pupils versus actual bodies, they're 2 different numbers, and I need to understand the difference.
It's fair, we, again, Jerry, we do have it, again, and I thought actually you would have by your place, I don't know, Meg, do we have those, the demographic data, that's available? So in your.
aren't these actual pupils in
Yeah,
these?
they are, but also in Jerry McGibbon's stuff, it goes into more detail. I don't think you have it. Oh, it is? I haven't seen it. So at your place, you also have the work from Jerry McGibbon. Is that? Yeah. So that's one. But I think it's fair based on at least what I'm hearing. We can certainly give you kind of the comparison to equalized to seated students. And you can see that, and I think you could make a pretty, you can make then the correlation to seated students to the equalized, and you can see you're gonna see some trend there going on, that you're gonna see that equalized outpacing the seated students, and that's probably, you'd see that in many locations, even though enrollment's going down pretty significantly in other places.
That's a
Because of
very
the needy
important
population.
It's a very important observation. If you're incurring greater and greater costs because more and more of your students are requiring support and education above and beyond a
Yeah.
baseline, that's very important in terms of projections. Wouldn't you agree?
So, yeah, we can certainly do that. Again, I think, I don't think it's significantly outpacing past years, but it would be good to show, equalized to actual
The
seated.
government is looking to increase immigration, to bring people from other parts of the world here. That will have a real impact on school systems in a state which is having trouble funding its education budget. So I don't think these are peripheral issues. I think they're issues which need to be brought into the public domain so people understand the issues that we're dealing with.
Fair enough.
So I have a takeaway there around looking at some graphing of equalized to actual student.
Yeah, no, I think that's helpful. Is there anything else from the board?
Well, I had a question, Jerry, if you're curious, the equalized pupil spreadsheets are available. If
In
you,
terms of versus actual number of bodies,
it'll show you the ADM, average daily membership, which is, I don't know, the 25-day snapshot from
Yep.
September to something in October.
That sheet is,
It basically shows you how it's made. If you like data, you'd love it.
Well, that sheet is, again, I'm not saying, it's just a really busy sheet.
Yeah.
I mean, I think what I'm hearing is it would make sense, we'll kind of show that articulated over a period of past years.
I remember last year the data tables showed a very small change in the number of students in the school system.
Mhm.
So now when I see a mention of a 4% increase in the equalized pupil, the conclusion I draw is we may not have increased the bodies, but we've increased the support which is necessary to teach students who are coming with different needs in terms of their education.
Let me ask
And
a
that's
simple
an
question.
conclusion.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I mean, is there a simple ratio? An ELL student's worth 1.2
Yes.
non-ELL?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would shed some light, because we have 196, I think, ELLs.
0.46 for every pre-K,
Yeah.
0.1.
Right.
I mean, I bet we
for
could
every.
do some fourth grade
yeah.
math and get
Yeah,
into these
0.1.
numbers
Yeah,
pretty easily.
that's what the spreadsheets are about.
Okay, yeah, I mean, why don't we do that? We'll just,
But again, we can,
Yeah.
it's fair. It's fine.
Okay. So, Bridget, anything else from the board? Anything else from the audience on the budget? Questions, comments, points of view? All right. So I think we'll move on. I know people were here for the budget. We're going to do budget communication. Then we have some policies, but I encourage folks, the number 10 on this agenda, the executive limitations policy monitoring, that's where we're actually talking about how we are actually doing on educating our children. So I encourage you, if you're able, to stay for that part, because we always could appreciate some weighing in on what we're doing with that. Anyway, so we're on to budget communication plan. What's our plan?
Well, we have a series of things that are upcoming. We talked about the steering committee meeting, which will be talked about. Obviously, there we have RETN that will be an important component. Our website, which is an important component. Our students are going to be working to also participate in getting out information and kind of putting it in their perspective words. But beyond that, we haven't formulated that yet, budget communication past sheet. But
yeah,
you guys
yeah.
did a lot yourselves too around, particularly as we ramped up to the last budget passage around website, Facebook page, etc. So again, I'm open to what you would like and how I can best support any of you. I've typically, reached out. I know a couple of you have joined me to various locations, PTO meetings, etc. I will be presenting to staff once we get things kind of solidified on what's out there. Again, staff members are community members in many cases, and also can help ask good questions and be informed. So I'm open to.
So we'll have a calendar the next time as far
Yeah.
as those kind of events. And, I mean, I can coordinate with Bridget, and she and I can plan on doing some write-ups. We may not need quite as many for the Facebook page, and then we can post them on the website, and we can see if they're worthy of a couple advertisements in the other paper.
Yeah, I would agree with that. One thing I would say before we even have a calendar, though, I do think we should put up what we already have as this most recent budget on the district website, and I think maybe on the Facebook page and wherever else we can, without spending a lot of money on it, just publicize that it's up there, because really a week from now is the last chance that the public is going to have to really voice any concerns or raise any questions before the 17th when we actually vote. It'll be hard to really incorporate a lot of changes if they don't come in that next meeting or leading up to that next meeting. And I think it's worth having it out there one more time for people to look at before we move forward.
Yeah, we've been pretty, and we'll make sure, Bridget, that's a good point. We'll make sure to have it up on the website, and we've been working hard to just make sure that's there. But you're right. I mean, the timeline is still pretty tight for people, getting out the information. So
what's our deadline for the next other paper article? because,
I don't know, Corey, do you know? Top of your head?
sorry.
It's 3 weeks, 4 weeks from, it's the last week of January, I believe.
Oh, okay, so but after we're gonna vote on the budget.
Yeah, but it would give
Still
us.
getting out information, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we can do a variety of things.
Because I'm happy to do a kind of sequel to my pretty simple, straightforward article last time, and it's okay, now that the numbers are in, this is what the budget's looking like, and
Yeah, I was online though, Steve. I was already lined up to do the next budget article.
Okay.
I thought that I'm confused because I'm not in town about when did we do the article on board member responsibilities, because that was also going to come out before the budget article.
That's coming out this next
We wanted to make
Thursday.
sure that people had time to run. Yeah.
Yeah, next Thursday it's coming out.
Okay.
This
so that
Thursday.
Will be in, and then the one that's due the last week in January would be the one on the budget, and I was on deck to write that one, I believe.
okay.
Okay.
All right. Okay.
Martin?
So, yes.
Well, I just wanted to say that I think some of these exhibits that are in this, and I've kind of lost my place, but some of them are very helpful to help understand where we are compared to other districts and also compared to what we've done in the past. And I think there was a block at around page 15, 16 to 20, and I think it picks back up at the ones that I like at around page 35. Yeah, page 35 to, I guess maybe 40, and then it starts getting busier again. But if you wanted to have some sort of executive summary of where South Burlington stands in comparison to its recent history and also compared to other districts in the state, some of these exhibits would be very helpful for people who are checking out the budget.
Yeah, I think that particularly when we get to the point where we're voting on the budget,
Yeah.
or after we vote on a budget and we're really getting the word out about what the budget is, those are particularly helpful then as well. We'll be honing presumably the message. A lot of the stuff in here is not stuff that we'll have in the final package. I mean,
Right.
because it tells us how we got to where we're
Yeah.
getting. So, but yeah, I agree. Those are very.
I mean, I
those
think
are
the
very
other,
helpful.
the other part, and we didn't go into detail again tonight on the bonding piece, but again, pretty much, there's some sensitivity to not doing an exorbitant amount of work on schools that we're not totally sure in the long term, and I'm talking long term.
Yeah.
But primarily what the bonding does on the stewardship does is, again, it talks about the restroom at the Munson Field. It's got one bus. It's got upgrades to kitchen equipment. It's got some security issues around security cameras and key entries, kind of maintenance. It's got that building analysis in there. It's got lighting fixture upgrades, not replacing the bulbs. These are, again, fixtures and whole new lighting, things that will last. It's got some floor areas. It's got paving. We removed out the repair piece. It's got fire alarms, doors, burner replacements, roofs in there, sectional roofs. So again, this is not, I think sometimes people hear about, the facilities needs. It's not putting in plush new rooms. It's taking care of things that are in need. It's a lot of money, and there's no question. But that said, we're trying to stay on par, and I reemphasize what we've spent on average in the past has been about that $525,000. It's not been enough because we're still kind of behind in certain areas. We're not at places where we have facility failure or surprises. We're in a good shape that way, but we don't ever want to be a district that's can't open tomorrow because we've got something going on that we could have resolved.
Right.
I just think we should also be clear though, David, when we talk about what our run rate is on stewardship, it's not really that 525. That's what we've had in the operating budget. But we had a bond in 2014 and another in 2016, right? So if I add up what we did in bonding plus our stewardship that was in the operating budget, I get $7.6 million over the last 6 years. So it's more like a run rate of $1.3 million. And I think that puts the bond in a little bit more perspective, because it's not a giant bond in comparison to what we've actually been spending if you just average it over the last
Right.
years. If that's simply what it takes to keep up 5 different buildings and the playing field.
Right,
all that.
and again, I'm not wanting to disagree at all, Bridget. I think those are respective numbers, but what I would say to you is that probably if other folks wanted to poke back at me, they would say, why didn't you upgrade the bathrooms 20 years ago to be ADA, or 15 years ago to be ADA compliant? Why didn't you do some of these other things? And so, part of that is average it in over a longer period of time, a shorter period of time. I think bottom line is we're trying to be good stewards. And I agree with you. What we did is we just gave you the operational side of what we did in the facility stewardship, and certainly didn't talk about what, again, we have articulated in the packet here about our bonded debt and some of the past projects and the stewardship work. So I think you're right. I appreciate you. I don't want to, I'm not trying to create any smoke screen at all around what we spent. It's very, I want to be very transparent, but anyway, it's where we are.
Yeah, certainly we're going to have a separate communication of one of our Facebook posts will probably be about the bond, obviously, and some of the things that Bridget's just talked about we'll put in there. But
Yep.
But Bridget and I can chat about divvying up some of those things for that communication. But let's move on
Yep.
then to the policy review if we can, and I think some of them are up for action in third reading, and the first is the policy D1, substitute teachers, and I'll go ahead and take a motion to approve this, and then we can have a discussion afterwards if there's any discussion to be had. Is there a motion to approve the policy D1, substitute teachers?
So moved.
Second.
All right, is there any discussion? I didn't think so. All those in favor, say aye.
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 All right, that one passes. There's nobody left to oppose it. Moving on to policy D2, volunteers and work study students. I take a motion to approve this policy, policy D2, volunteers and work study students.
There was a few questions on this, Martin, that came up from the last board meeting.
We
And
can
those
get those
questions
questions first.
were, the word extended in the second paragraph, last sentence, is in the model policy, the SBA. That was a question that came
Yeah,
up.
I actually asked that question, I recall. So-
Okay, and then work study students have set schedules and are under the supervision of the school district employee. There was a question specifically about that one as well. And there may be, but very seldom, that a volunteer may be alone. Again, I think I articulated that last time. And then mentors are background checked. So again, that was in relationship to volunteers and work study.
Okay, all right, good. So take a motion on policy D2, volunteers and work study students.
So moved.
I'll second.
Any discussion? All right, all those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed? Actually, am I supposed to do a roll call?
You probably should on Bridget, yeah,
Shoot.
but.
Sorry for complicating.
No, that was my fault, I should have remembered. So we're gonna back up, we're gonna do a roll call on substitute teachers to be in accordance with our, so I suppose the clerk is supposed to do this, but I will go ahead, and is it okay if I call the
Yeah.
roll? Anybody expert on these rules? But this means I have to say Steve's last name. I have to pronounce
Kozlowski.
it, Yeah, I know.
It's better than our now being here, right? Yeah.
All right, Bridget Burkhart.
Aye.
All right, Alex McHenry.
Aye.
Steve Wozlowski.
Aye.
All right, good. That's on that policy D1. We've now made that official. Policy D2, Bridget Burkhart.
Aye.
Alex McHenry.
Aye.
Steve Wozlowski.
Aye.
All right, there. Now we're official. We followed all the rules. So policy D3 also up for a third reading. This is alcohol and drug-free workplace, and I guess we had a question on that.
Yeah,
on-
unlawful,
On what unlawful means.
right, and that was also in the model policy and recommended.
All right. All right, so I'll take a motion on alcohol and drug-free workplace place policy D3.
So moved.
Second.
All right, I will call the roll. Bridget Burkhart.
Aye.
Alex McHenry.
Yes.
Okay, fair enough.
Gotta
Steve
mix it
Wizlowski.
Aye.
Excellent. So that one also passes. I don't call my own if
No.
it's right. All right.
No, not unless you had to.
Unless I have to. All right. So third reading also professional development policy D5. I did have one change which I didn't notice was reflected in this version. And that was changing under implementation in the second paragraph to the accomplishment of the district's priorities, to say to the accomplishment of the district ends. Are we able to approve this policy with that suggested change?
I don't see why not.
So we can make sure, does that please the rest of the board to do it that way? In that case, with that amendment to this policy, changing priorities to ends, do I have a motion to approve policy D5, professional development?
So moved.
Second.
All right, I shall call the roll. Bridget Burkhart.
Aye.
Alex McHenry.
Aye.
Steve Wizlowski.
Aye.
All right, I think two more on third reading. Look at this. Policy D7, Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. This is the third reading, so I will take a motion to approve that. I don't believe we have any questions on that one.
So moved.
Second.
All right, I shall call roll. Bridget Burkhart.
Aye.
Alex McHenry.
Aye.
Steve Wizlowski.
Aye.
All right, we're just rocking. And policy E1 is our last one that has third reading. And that's tobacco prohibition. Did we have any questions? I don't think we had any questions that we were
Came
waiting
back
on
to us.
answers. So I'll take a motion on policy E1.
So moved.
Second.
I will call roll. Bridget Burkhart,
Aye.
Alex McHenry,
Aye.
and Steve Wizlowski.
Aye.
All right, so the last two are second reading. We'll go on to third reading. Are there any questions, inputs on those last two before we have third reading at the, it's not the meeting next week, the 10th, it's the following?
Because next week was just budget.
Just budget, right, okay. So no questions or comments on those two, so we can move on to executive limitations, policy monitoring, the 10th item on the agenda. So how are we doing?
Actually, I was incorrect on so January 10th will be the time when we bring those up. what did I just say on the
Oh,
date?
okay,
Those
that's
other
fine.
ones, but that's,
Yeah,
Yeah.
fine. We'll get
Okay.
to it.
we could postpone it.
I don't see any reason to. Quick.
So, why don't I be timely, and I'm gonna let Stuart actually walk you through any of this. I think that's probably the most helpful, so come on up, Stuart, and we'll walk you through this. Again, we've introduced this a couple different times. And again, Stuart will walk you through a little bit of how we've broken it down so that it's not extremely cumbersome in the presentation. So Stuart,
So do you want to hold questions to the end, Stuart, or do you want questions as we go, or how do you want to do it?
Questions as we go, I think, would be fine.
Okay.
Just like to give a general overview, which is not that unsimilar from what I did last time that we met. I haven't been at the last two board meetings, so I feel, wow, that was a long time ago. And that there have been some updates based on comments from the board at that particular meeting in terms of the data. So two big changes. I mean, in the past, we have just basically come to you with the ENDS monitoring reports of various types and formats, and we haven't treated them like the other monitoring reports where we said, you know, bit by bit is each one of these components, and I think that has created kind of an abstraction, as it were, as opposed to being concrete and saying, oh, no, that's not acceptable or that is an acceptable interpretation. So we've also given you the typical score sheet to go with it and broken up each of the detail policies within academic proficiencies. So that in itself may be something that people want to discuss, because that's a different way than we've dealt with these policies. The key changes since the last time, one of the things that happened in the last year that was not true when I gave this monitoring policy last year, is that all seniors last fall took the ACT. And so before, ACT and SAT have been tests of choice, and so we haven't used that data because when it's not all students, it's really not a reflection. You can say, well, we did fine, but what did we do fine against? I want you to know that all seniors took the ACT again this fall, and in fact, all juniors are going to be taking it this spring, and from now on, it will be juniors in the spring. And the reason for that change is that SBAC is no longer going to be given to juniors, which we didn't want to overtest them by having them take the ACT. And we did have enough money in our budget that we could cover it for this particular year. We actually cut out that extra money that we found for next year as one of the things we made a small savings on in the budget. But this data is the ACT results from our students. And so when you see that our data is pretty much the same as the state's. Remember, the state is taking it by choice. Not every student in the state took it. And so in the past, we had about 100 students who took the ACT, and our scores were a little bit higher. But when 173 students took it, that includes students who may never have taken an SAT or an ACT if it was totally their choice. We had pretty good results.
So I do have a question. If we're on page 3, the ACT results, this is a pretty detailed question, but when I look at the reading, science, and composite, the year, that we're exactly matching the Vermont standard, it just didn't make, actually in almost every one of these categories, actually the English on top, 23.3 and 23.3. Yeah, it just didn't make sense to me that we were.
It's because every single, whether our students, whether they're college-bound, are taking this test.
No, I understand that.
In the state, that's
But
not the case.
No, I think Martin's question, though, is there's a coincidence that he feels between South Burlington and Vermont. In other words, in
what
reading,
were the chances?
24.4, 24.4, 23.2, 23.2. So that's whether or not.
I will double check those numbers to make sure they're right.
Yeah, if you just double check. Yeah, thank you.
Because I'm certainly not above typing in the wrong numbers.
No,
and that's what they are, typed in. The other piece, so so I'm going to leave the ACT because I don't want to go through. I added another way of looking at the comparable state data in terms of the chart on page 7 is the chart that you basically have seen before. The additional chart is the one on page 6, where we looked at the cohort, because it went up and down. And so instead of just saying, oh, we went up one year and we went up, or we went down one year and we went down, did they go down from their original score as a cohort? In which case they looked a little better over time. So that's what that data reflects. And again, these are on the subtests and looks at students who are either better, greater, or less than the state by 10%, or 4% better. So we looked at it against state results.
All right, so this kind of presents to me one of the bigger questions that I have. And that is the choice of what we're deciding constitutes proficiency for the school. I mean, there's two different ways of looking at proficiency, first of all. There's proficiency for an individual student, but what we're also trying to do here is decide under our global end statement if we're school-wide at a level of proficiency. And what you've chosen to measure that is being at least 10% higher than the state. And I'm not sure if that's the best basis. I'd like to understand your thinking behind that. But it seems to me that if the state, and it isn't necessarily doing terrible, what happens if when you look at the state, there's only 30 or 40% proficiency, and we get, do 10% better? I don't think that's good enough.
Right.
So why are we using that as the yard, or as this yardstick for measuring?
I think that's a good question. I think it's an interesting question, Martin, because we just got a new state document today in which the state is using, their system for ESSA, and that may be what we move to, and they have a point system. And so, for example, to be a bullseye in the state on the combined point system that they built with the scale scores, you need to have a 3.66 or greater to have a bullseye. This is just on the overall, not the subtests, overall math, overall English language arts. 2 of our schools are greater than 3.66, which is the highest thing, bullseye, and 2 of our schools are 3.65, which is the top of on target.
Okay.
So that may be the measure that we want to be using in the future with the state. I realize this is arbitrary. I could choose, give me another number,
Right, no, I understand, and it's just, do we want to,
Well, two things.
one question is, do we want to measure it against state averages? Is that the appropriate measure, or do we want to have some more independent, though perhaps subjective?
Well,
goal?
I don't feel we still know enough about the SBAC to really be able to say what the overall target is. When I look at on page, I run out of number, 8, for example, where for the class of 2018, because last year when they took this, the first graduating class data that we had, if you look and you see the kids who were proficient with distinction, right, our percentages versus the state percentages within each of all those things. And when I say proficient with distinction, that's actually the wrong thing. That were 1.5 above the standard deviation of the test. That, I think, might be a closer measure. And we could just look at the students who are above the standard deviation, because they only give us 3 measures in this test. Right. 1.5 below, on the bell curve, 1.5 above.
Right, so that was actually my second, well, I probably have more questions than that, but looking at the percentages of the 1.5 or the norm, and is that sufficient? Is that a sufficient goal that we're after, that we want? Should we be measuring, like you say, at the 1.5 and have a goal for what we're trying to reach at that level, as opposed to just getting people to the norm?
No, I think that could very well be, and that would be, I think a cleaner piece. Then I don't know what we would decide. Again, I measured it against the state. We would have to decide what is the growth factor that we would want to have at 1.5 above the standard deviation over time.
And then again, there's, what was the regression to the mean? I can't be asking for all of our kids to be above average.
Right.
Well, one of the things I think,
or anything?
It just won't work that way.
well, one of the things, again, I'm not, I know we're jumping around, but Stuart's put together, like on page 7, I think, this is an important part of the conversation, particularly as we go towards more proficiency-based graduation requirements, but, this does show you, which I think is important, it's cohort tracking over time, right?
Yes.
And so that's an important component, because you may say, oh, that's really great that you're doing, 59% on this particular area, but how have you done the previous years is important. And I think when you look at this particular, you just take like, the 6th grade, the graduating class of 2024, writing in 15, writing in 16, writing in 17. Right. Again, I think that's an important component. Is our system, to your point, is our system working to provide a growth opportunity? What are we doing around resourcing and budgeting and items that we're doing? And again, that's part of what I think you look to us to say, how are we readying our kids to meet our ends as they progress? So, again, where these areas are red, even though we can question whether or not the percentages are good enough, I mean, those are areas I think that highlight to you guys, you know, what are you doing? What are you doing to respond to these needs, particularly like at the 6th grade?
And this is a minor point on that, on whether we should be grading on how well we're doing based on 2 years before.
That's right.
As opposed to just the previous year. Because I'm just looking at
I
one
agree.
where it's the 9th grade cohort graduating in 2021, and 2015, they did 63% of, you know, the proficiency. Then they went to 70, and then they went down to 64, but we're measuring how well we did on that 64 relative to the 63, not to the 70.
That's right.
Yeah, it's a minor point, but I think that's.
right.
Right, and as we have more trend data, one of the things, again, that will change for next year is that we'll have 3rd through 9th grade data on SBAC. There won't be 11th grade SBAC anymore. So some of those gaps will be a little easier to see, because when you look at 11th grade data, there's 2 years, you know, in which there was no data collected at all.
Right.
Just quickly moving on from there, you know, there's the report card data. That's basically the same as we've put out. We've done it at every level. Of course, within each of these, you know, I've called out which of the proficiencies a particular subject and or report card piece relates to. Again, we have done a little bit of changing in the elementary school report card, and we're going to be doing a little bit of changing. We'll talk about that in a minute in the high school report card. In the elementary report card this year, we have changed this coming report card in January, the math standards and the PE standards. So the year-over-year piece won't be exactly accurate, and we're looking to both to English and to social studies for and science for the coming year.
Which page am I looking at? I'm sorry.
Well, I was flipping through, you know, a wide variety, and if you wanted to call a particular page, I was just saying report cards in general.
Oh, okay. All right, thanks.
So, but I just wanted to be clear, when we look at some of the longitudinal data, not that there's many years there, but let's just go back to page 15, you know, and it says adds and subtracts fractions with unlike denominators. That may not be a math standard on the report card for this year coming. So in other words, we may have something similar or something more explicit. And again, one thing to point out with the high school and the report cards.
What page?
17, why don't we just do that as an example for mathematics? We only included mathematics that at least a junior should be taking minimally. So if we had a student who was in Algebra 1, that data isn't in there because that's not meeting our standard.
I'm just finding this report card, I'm finding them a little bit confusing because maybe I'm misinterpreting it, but if you were to say, to increase the level of challenge of the material, you would think that perhaps people might not get grades that are as great. And vice versa, there could be grade inflation, you know, trying to make sure kids are getting into college and moving forward. I'm just wondering, you know, without more information on, you know, how the underlying report card is calculated, what this is really telling us, because I would assume that, you know, we're adjusting things behind the scenes each time. And I think you've said that a little bit about the SBAC data too, that because the SBAC keeps shifting around and changing methodologies, I'm struggling a little bit with how comfortable I am making decisions based on this information yet, and whether there's something else that we should be looking at, as opposed to these two different measures, these standardized tests and the report cards. I don't have a great solution, but I guess I'm just expressing a little discomfort in whether we've kind of gotten there yet in terms of metrics to analyze how we're doing.
Right, and I would agree with you, and that's why in the compliance report, Bridget, we show the new high school report card, which is proficiency-based, because I think that will get to some of those questions because a grade won't just be based on averages, but will be based on actual proficiencies. But, you know, let's get there. So, you know, part of the problem with report card data is exactly what you said, but it is the data that we collect in terms of, you know, how students are, at this point, assessed within their classes, which are made up of pieces. In future years, one of the things we're working on is our assessment calendar, which includes performance-based assessment at the high school at least 4 times a year for all sophomores and for freshmen. And that data will be available, you know, in coming years in these kind of reports, which may get to a better piece than the final report card grade, but a performance assessment that said, we looked at these 3 standards, this is how students did, and, you know, that's based on a rubric. Any other questions on report cards before I do move to the SBAC and compliance report at the end?
Okay, good. Keep going.
So, so within the summation, I think I speak to some of the facts of the kind of data we do have and don't have for academic proficiency. I do report non-compliance. I did want to show you how that data is taken for those subcategories and tests, and one of the reasons why it, you know, is important. And again, if the board decided, for example, that in order to be proficient, you know, by this standard, that we wanted to have, you know, a percentage of students 1.5 above the standard deviation, that would be a lot easier to calculate because that's pretty straight out. I don't have to do any complicated mathematics for that. But the other key piece is, as we move to this question of proficiency, we are building performance-based assessments and have been at the high school. And so the last page, which it's not attached on mine, I don't know if it's attached on yours. It's the one that's is gray. I think that this is going to be a clear indication, you know, in the same way, in some ways, that the elementary is, so that, for example, now, while a 9th grader would get in math, they would get a grade, they would also get, you know, on a 4-point scale where they are in terms of being able to express the relationships of math or solve problems or apply, as well as the transferable skills. In the first, this has actually already gone out for PE in the first quarter, because PE courses are, many of them are only a quarter long. But starting at the semester, this will be done at the semesters, students will be evaluated or reported on in this way. And so as we begin to build, and again, this is just a sample report card, but all English 10 would be the same, all US history. Right now, they're just doing transferable skills because they're rewriting their standards, because the standards just changed for the state. The state adopted new social studies standards. But this kind of report card, and we're working on moving that towards the middle school, I think will give a much more accurate piece of how we're doing, not just with our academic proficient standards, but also, for example, with the transferable skills in certain of our, you know, you'll see these when we do our reports on personal development and so on.
So we would know for a cohort, how many kids are on level 1 through 4 on the proficiency, and that can be brought up to a level where we have X% in each of those
Areas.
categories.
Yep.
Exactly.
Okay, and we can transfer that concept of proficiency over to whether we're meeting the ends by just deciding what is a sufficient level,
Right.
right? And that's gonna start.
So it started at the high school.
High school with.
We're cleaning it up at the elementary, but the elementary has generally had a system such as that. We're going to be more explicit about some of those standards, so I won't just say writing.
Right.
And the middle school is the area where we're working on right now. The middle school, of course, has been working on personal learning plans. When we do, how are we doing for personal development, the middle school might be the place that shows the greatest growth versus some of the other schools, because that's where their focus has been over the last couple of years within the state system, which is, of course, part of this as well.
Steve, yeah.
Abandoning letter grades, or?
No, they're still gonna be letter
Still-
grades, but.
Yeah, at least at the high school. I'm not sure what the middle school will look like yet. At the high school, at this time, all students will still get a letter grade, and then they'll be having the proficiencies as semester reports, but they'll still have quarter letterly grades.
Quarterly letter grade, gotcha.
Yes, and an average grade at the end of the year.
Okay.
That's a fairly big controversy amongst the state around, particularly at high school, what's happening with moving to proficiency and whether or not grades are there. And so, again, the high school, we've been pretty clear and consistent. We're gonna keep the grades, at the same time, provide the articulation on the compliance to those proficiencies as so noted.
I think the simple question is just, is it still translatable in college applications and
Yeah.
such?
Right.
So-
And that's partly the conversation around that. There's gonna be a lot more information.
Mhm.
I think it's also being sensitive and compliant to the issues that respond to students' career, college, next steps.
Right. Student has to be proficient in the state of Vermont in all these things, so we definitely have to show that they are, and an A doesn't just show that. And at the same time, what do we transcript is obviously a big question in terms of what do we send on
Yep.
when somebody applies to a school, or for their job, for that matter.
So, just to, looking the bigger picture again on what we're trying to do here. The concept behind our ends and trying to monitor them is to see how we're doing, to see how we're performing, see where we can make improvements. And the way that when we go out and we try to get people to vote for our budget, for instance, we want them to understand what they're paying for. And what we've historically we've had a report card, which doesn't appear, I don't think we've had one in a couple of years, if I.
No, it's up there on the.
Is it now?
Yeah,
Somehow I missed it, I didn't see it.
Yeah, it's posted.
But we put various information out there as far as how we're doing in getting kids to college, how we're doing in graduating kids, how many AP tests are taken, our SAT, our ACT, our standardized test scores, et cetera. And we do throw all those things out there, and it gives you a sense. But we're trying to make this more tied to data, so we understand from the boards. I mean, there's supposedly many different levels of this, but so that the board can be explained to the community how we're doing and where we need to improve. The other level presumably is trying to push the administration to be looking at this as objectively and be data-driven as much as possible in the educational area. And certainly, I don't need to know this now, but I think we do need to continue to understand how this whole exercise is affecting how the schools are actually being run. Again, not something to necessarily get into now, but it just, the whole ends concept, and I don't mean to get on my soapbox yet again after the past 8 years, but I mean, it is to really understand what the product is that we're delivering in a more objective, data-driven manner. And we're still not quite there. We keep on making progress there, but of course also the ground keeps on moving out, from under us as far as moving from the from the kneecap to the SBAC, and going to proficiency based. But that's what the end goal is, and I think we need to keep that in mind, because that really should be the primary thing that the board's doing, is understanding how we're doing and where the administration can tell us how we're improving. So, sorry, on my soapbox with this.
And I think-
mean, it's an ongoing process.
We may have complicated it too in some ways. You know, if you go back to the global end statement at the top of the, you know, it's successfully completing their education, right? That those cultural and academic proficiency, you know, at a cost that the community can afford.
Right.
It may be that, you know, again, Stuart and I have been at this a long time, it may be that we're digging too deep, right? Because again, part of that is, are kids ready for their next steps? How are they progressing? Is it about just the readiness of that next step? I think we've dug into some much more specific detail on wanting data, but if it was truly just in this global end statement, looking at how are kids doing, right? Then is it really about kind of at these transitional grades, are they ready for middle school? Are they ready for high school? Are they ready for college and career? And that might be, we've chosen to dig in to probably a fault about creating some confusion maybe, I don't know, but
No, I
think
yeah.
fundamentally that global end statement, again, I go off onto an interpretation that may be like, what are you talking about? You know, from, you know, when I go into my interpretation here, I may be way too wordy. And again, I have some examples of that around other policy governance school districts that are pretty, I don't know, Stuart and I've looked at it, so I was like, wow, that seems like basic and simple.
Well,
So-
let me say, I mean, we've had this discussion before, and I think I keep on, we have these discussions long enough periods of time between them that I forget most of what I've said or learned the time before, but that we've talked about whether we're trying to get this kind of broad-based measure of how we're doing, as opposed to, we're gonna look at each individual student and then build up from there to see how we're doing. You know, I mean, how are each individual student doing as far as the proficiency on regarding our ends, and then we kind of add that all up, as opposed to having just some kind of close measure to tell us how we're doing on things. And that we've gone with, I think, with trying to build it from that
Yeah.
bottom up from previous discussions. And I still think that's the right
I
way
think so,
to
too.
do it.
And
But
that-
it's,
And that's why we're doing it. I think it does make sense, but in some ways, there's, we're kind of giving you a lot of the details underneath that you might not necessarily need on the initial, the outcome, right? So ideally, if we could say that our students are here, and then if you want, you can look at how they progress as a cohort, right?
Right.
But really what you want is, how are they doing here? You know, how are they doing? And so part of the complexity is, in part, we've had different levels of data and some of the tests have changed, but we've kind of given you that sea of change over time. And so I just wonder, I think we're on the right track. I think we're being transparent. We have an exorbitant amount of data. We're working stronger on cohort-related tracking. But that said, you know, it's, the global end statement is pretty basic and simple.
I also think, as you know, as you mentioned, Mark, it's been shifting ground, but I think it's been shifting in the correct direction by the state. It's just that trying to make it work, because the state basically came up with its own ends policy, right? And they call that proficiency-based graduation and transferable skills within that proficiency-based. So that's the system that we have to guarantee to the state that we're graduating students on. And so when you look at that piece where they say, oh, you know, they all have to be effective communicators, they have to be integrated thinkers, they have to be practical and creative problem solvers, they have to be good citizens, and they have to be have self-direction. And we say they have to be academically proficient, lifelong learners.
Actually.
yeah.
You know,
watching us.
it's a relationship. And so we've been building our system, and so the conversations that we want teachers to have are those conversations. And they started with the ends, And they've continued now because teachers have really grasped the transferable skills, especially at the high school, especially on the personal learning part here at the middle school. You know, we're working on it with the elementary school. So I do think that while the data has shifted in trying to figure out the data set that really explains it, that the system is changing in a way that we can say that we are either doing well or not as well as we would like,
Right.
and know how to bring that forward.
Right, which is the big part of the goal. So I'll throw just one other thing out there. I know it's getting late. Next time we'll have to put this first. So do we occasionally, should we revisit, you know, I don't want to revisit the whole ends, but I want to, are we focusing on a data point which is probably really difficult to get, that may be the most important one, which is where are our graduates after 6 years or 4 years or 5? I mean, I know this has come up before, but it seems increasingly that's, you know, we may be hitting all these perfectly fine.
But how are they doing, really?
And yeah, have we prepared them for college, and have we prepared them for life? And do we have any checks? I mean, that's not like a track every student. That could be a broader statistical, you know, or sampling of something to just understand that better.
Well, you know, I mean, it's an interesting thing you bring that up. So Addison Northeast, which is also a policy governance system, and I'll have to get you, they just did a 4-page color brochure for all their ends total. It's just, but one of the pieces of it was they did 3 or 4 graduates several years down an interview. I don't know how those students were selected, or, but that was a piece of their presentation. Whether we'd want to try to do a random sample with some key questions, I don't think is, you know, necessarily a bad thing.
We should, well, I was going to say we should get Vincent on that, but he's retiring, I think, isn't he? So, yeah, that would be
Well,
something that we should keep in mind.
Well,
you know, but let's get this done
ESSA
first.
is working as, I mean, part of the, you know, tracking what students go into college is a component. Armed Services has been exempt from that, which is also, so that's also a factor when you look at percentage of kids that are moving on, hasn't been able to be tracked. That's going to, at some point here soon, be tracked, so that those are potential appropriate career articulation matches.
Right.
I think you're right. I mean, it would be good. You know, I did it in my previous school in Georgia. We tracked students that went through our system and went on to different high schools, and then we tracked them, where did they go after graduating from high school. And we made that correlation connected to some of their academic endeavors in the earlier years, whether that was a predictable approach and how they did, so that we can inform instructional practice. But I think we certainly can work to do that again with some resources maybe in the upcoming budget around, you know, people that can help with, you know, communication and reaching out and gathering that facts. That may be an area that we can really push on. So,
Right.
Yeah.
So, are we doing something with, on this today? I don't know that.
Well, I you know, my plan
continued.
at this point would not be to bring this one back, but to go with other ones. So, you know, the one thing that I would certainly want to know is whether you thought the interpretation of the superintendent was right, because I use that interpretation throughout, and if that's a problem.
This has all of them on there, right? Yeah.
So I'm wondering if we want to bring at least that issue back, where we can think specifically of that question again, because I was looking more broadly, and having the whole board here, you know, when we have everybody here. Maybe even the first meeting in February when we've got the budget out from under us.
Yeah, I would actually recommend that because of a family matter. I won't be at the meeting on the
Yeah.
17th.
Oh, okay, yeah, so that would be my suggestion, and maybe we can, I would want to maybe talk a little bit more as well as far as our direction and what we're
Going to be doing.
trying to do with this
Fair.
as well. Any other comments? I'm sorry, I kind of was dominating that discussion there, but
It's good to have passion, Mike.
yeah, I guess. Bridget, did you have anything on that?
Nothing else. You hit on I had a list of comments, but you hit on most of them, and I brought some of them up a little bit earlier. So, yeah.
All right, great, thanks.
Thanks, Bridget.
So let's move on. I assume, Bridget, you're on vacation. You probably don't need to stay for the last few items here, I don't think. But you're welcome to, obviously. I'm just saying.
Close to done, I think.
But we are,
Setting the agenda.
I'm happy to stay on. Okay.
okay, all right. So, setting agenda for January 10th.
Yeah.
Let's see, that's,
That's next week,
Any
primarily
changes
it's
that
budget, and we've got those two policies that would go up for third readings that
we'll
you
do
saw.
those. Yeah.
I mean,
that'll be quick.
so that's really the main
And
piece,
so-
and then there's,
And so we'll get that information sooner rather than later. Well, I guess it's Wednesday already, but by this weekend, so we can,
we'll work hard to do it.
That
I
we
gotta
talked about.
talk with John around that, but yep, should be able to.
My other question on that agenda was whether that's technically a regular meeting or if that was a special meeting. I know it was previously scheduled, but is it really a regular meeting of the board, or is that the special budget meeting?
Well, we call them regular meetings, but they're identified on the items that are really just budget, and we stay on track with our other things that are more consistent with, announcements and things like that that come from the you know what I mean?
yeah.
But you're wondering about whether we should call it special budget meeting or something, right, Bridget?
It's just, I'm not proposing it, I just want to make sure that we weren't missing
Yeah, we'll
something
make
that-
sure. I don't know what we've done. I think we've called them in the past that, but we'll look. It's a good point.
All right, so the 17th, we've got the minutes here.
Yeah, you've got the budget action is on the 17th.
Not the minutes, the agenda, sorry. I must be getting late. So are there any
we're
changes
good.
on that? That looks pretty good. Master plan visioning, good. Yeah,
I like when they adjourn before 10. So that's,
yeah, yes. And we're gonna,
we aspire to
Yes.
adjourn
we are
before
good.
10.
We will be there. We will get there. Future agenda items, any input on that? Seeing none. Going on to number 13, considering the minutes for the last meeting. Were there any questions or input on that?
I only had a small point, which was that in exec session, it's marked that we were discussing negotiations with teachers, which is not quite right. It was negotiations with
Administrator.
administrators.
Okay, yeah,
There's a tiny thing, but that was all I had.
good catch. I read this one very closely and missed that somehow. So with that change, I think there's consensus that the minutes are approved. Any questions on accounts payable order number 23? Seeing none, hearing none from the phone. Accounts payable order check to Bell Kate School in the amount of $54,750 for special education services that we contract out for. Is there a motion to approve that? Or did you want to
No,
discuss
I think
it
that's good.
first?
No, I think it's fine. Just, you probably want to do the same roll call.
Oh, yes, thank you for the reminder on the roll call.
But you've
Do
got
I have a
it.
motion to, a motion here?
Second.
Okay, roll call, Bridget, I was about to call you the wrong name, so I'm just gonna say Bridget. Okay. Bridget Burkhart, sorry, there we go.
Aye.
I don't know what Bridget I was gonna call you, but it wasn't coming out
Your brain's
Burkhart.
tired.
Very, yeah, I'm exhausted.
Aye.
Well, no, she didn't say aye yet.
Oh, I thought she did.
Did you say aye?
I did.
All right, sorry, Alex McHenry, sorry.
Aye.
Yeah, sorry.
Steve Wizlowski.
Aye.
All right, that's approved as well. Motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second,
All in favor? I'm not gonna take a roll call on
Aye.
that one.
yes.
All right.
Aye.
Okay,
All right, thanks a lot, Bridget.
thank you, Bridget.
Night, everyone.
Enjoy the
night.
rest of your
Back to the
time.
fun.